Single dad got sacked in work for being late, after helping a pregnant woman out of water. He saved a stranger's life and lost his job for it. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days straight. Charles Jones gripped the steering wheel tighter as his windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the deluge hammering down on his decade-old sedan. The radio crackled with emergency warnings about flash flooding across the county, but Charles couldn't afford to turn back. He was already running 20 minutes late for his shift at Morrison's manufacturing plant, and Frank Morrison didn't tolerate excuses. He barely tolerated Charles as it was. Before we begin the beautiful story, please subscribe. It's free, and it makes my day 100% better. Also like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're watching from on comment section. I pray may the good God Almighty bless and preserve you all and your family. Amen. Let's begin. Come on, Charles muttered, squinting through the sheet of water obscuring the road ahead. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. Another text from his daughter, Emma. He didn't need to look to know what it said. She'd sent him off this morning with her usual goodbye. Love you, Dad. Be safe. At 13, Emma had learned to be the parent sometimes, especially since her mother, Jennifer, had walked out on them 4 years ago. Charles was all Emma had, and Emma was all Charles had. That's why this job mattered. That's why being late felt like swallowing glass. The overtime pay from this shift would cover Emma's school trip to Washington, D.C., something she'd been talking about for months but pretended not to care about when she saw him reviewing their bills at the kitchen table. The road dipped suddenly, and Charles felt his stomach drop with it. The low-lying stretch ahead had transformed into something between a road and a river. Brown water rushed across the asphalt, carrying branches and debris in its current. He slowed down, calculating. The plant was only another 3 miles. If he could just get through this section, he'd make it. He'd keep his job. He'd keep Emma's dreams alive. That's when he saw her. At first, Charles thought it was a trick of the rain, a shape that didn't belong in the chaos of water and wind. But as he inched closer, his headlights caught the unmistakable silhouette of a woman standing waist-deep in the floodwater, one hand braced against a partially submerged car, the other wrapped protectively around her swollen belly. Charles slammed on his brakes, his car fishtailing slightly before stopping. Through the downpour, he could see her more clearly now, a young woman, maybe late 20s, with dark hair plastered to her face. Her lips were moving, and even though he couldn't hear her over the storm, he could read the desperation in her expression. She was screaming for help. Every rational part of Charles's brain screamed to him to keep driving. He was already late. Frank Morrison had warned him last month. One more tardy, Jones, and you're done. I don't care if your kid has a recital or your grandmother dies. This is a business, not a charity. Charles had nodded, swallowed his pride, and promised it wouldn't happen again. But here was this woman, pregnant and stranded, and the water was rising. Charles Jones had never been good at walking away from people who needed help. It was probably why Jennifer had left. She'd said he cared more about strangers than his own family, that his hero complex would leave them broke. Maybe she was right. Maybe she was about to be proven right. He threw open his door and was immediately soaked to the bone. The rain felt like needles against his skin as he waded into the floodwater. It was deeper than it looked, the current stronger. Within seconds, the water was at his thighs, pulling at his legs with surprising force. "Hold on," he shouted, though his voice was nearly swallowed by the storm. "I'm coming." The woman's head snapped toward him, and relief flooded her face. She tried to move toward him but stumbled, nearly losing her grip on the car. Charles pushed forward faster, his work boots filling with water, making each step heavier than the last. When he reached her, he could see she was trembling, whether from cold, fear, or exhaustion, he couldn't tell. Probably all three. Up close, he noticed the way her hands shook as they clutched her belly, protective and desperate. "Are you hurt?" Charles had to shout directly into her ear. "My car, it stalled. I tried to turn around, but the water," her words came in gasps. "The baby, I'm 34 weeks, I can't." It's okay, Charles interrupted, trying to sound calmer than he felt. The water was now at his waist, and he could feel debris bumping against his legs. What's your name? Doris, she managed. Doris, I'm Charles. We are going to get you out of here, okay? Can you walk? She nodded, but when she took a step, her face contorted in pain. My ankle. I twisted it getting out of the car. Charles didn't hesitate. I'm going to carry you. Put your arms around my neck. You can't. I'm too heavy. The baby. Doris. He looked her straight in the eyes. I've got you. Trust me. Something in his voice must have convinced her because she nodded. Charles positioned himself, sliding one arm under her knees and another around her back. She was heavier than he expected, the weight of pregnancy, waterlogged clothes, and fear, but he'd worked construction before the plant job. His body remembered how to carry heavy loads. He lifted her, and Doris wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face against his shoulder. Charles felt the full force of responsibility settle onto him like a physical weight. This woman, this unborn child, they were depending on him. Emma was depending on him to keep his job. And somewhere in the distance, the clock was ticking toward the start of his shift. The journey back to his car felt 3 times longer than the journey out. The current kept trying to push him sideways, and twice he nearly lost his footing on the uneven road surface hidden beneath the murky water. Doris held on tighter each time he stumbled, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps against his neck. You're doing great, he told her, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to her or himself. Almost there. When they finally reached his car, Charles carefully maneuvered Doris into the passenger seat. She winced as she settled in, one hand never leaving her belly. He slammed the door and ran around to the driver's side, water slushing in his boots. Inside the car, the relative quiet after the storm's assault felt surreal. Charles turned the heat up as high as it would go, though his hands were shaking so badly it took 2 tries to adjust the dial. Thank you, Doris whispered, her voice raw. Thank you so much. I thought, when the car stopped and the water kept rising, I thought this was it. I thought, her voice broke. Hey, you're safe now, Charles said, though safe felt like a generous term. They were still in the middle of a flood zone, his car was running on fumes, and he was now officially 40 minutes late for work. Where were you heading? Where can I take you? The hospital, Doris said, her voice tight. I was on my way to County General. I had a checkup scheduled, but then the roads, and I thought I could make it through, but... She stopped, her face suddenly contorting. Doris, what is it? Contraction, she breathed, her hands pressing hard against her belly. Oh God, I've been having them since the car stalled, but I thought it was just stress, but, she gasped. They're getting closer together. Charles felt ice flood his veins. How close together? Maybe 7 minutes? 8. Doris looked at him with wide, terrified eyes. I'm not due for another 6 weeks. This can't be happening. Not now. Not like this. Charles looked at his phone. No signal. The storm must have taken out the cell towers. He looked out at the flooded road ahead, then back at the road behind them, equally impassable now that the water had risen further. They were trapped. Okay, Charles said, forcing his voice to stay steady even as his mind raced. Okay, we are going to figure this out. County General, that's the hospital on Highway 47, right? Doris nodded, tears streaming down her face now, mixing with the rainwater still dripping from her hair. But we can't get there. The roads. There's another way, Charles said, his mind pulling up a mental map of the county. Old Mill Road. It runs higher, less likely to be flooded. It's longer, takes us way out of the way, but it might be our only shot. He didn't mention that Old Mill Road would add at least another 30 minutes to the drive. Didn't mention that taking that route meant he'd be over an hour late for work. Frank Morrison would fire him. That was certain. But looking at Doris, at the fear in her eyes and the protective way her hands cradled her unborn child, Charles knew there was only one choice he could live with. Hold on, he said, putting the car in reverse. We are going to get you and your baby to that hospital. As Charles carefully backed away from the floodwater and began the long detour on Old Mill Road, his phone, still without signal, displayed the time, 7:47 a.m. His shift had started 17 minutes ago. By the time he dropped Doris at the hospital and made it to work, it would be close to 9 a.m. In the passenger seat, Doris gripped the door handle as another contraction hit, her breathing coming in measured pants. "I'm sorry," she gasped when it passed. "I'm so sorry. You probably have somewhere to be, and here I am." "Don't apologize," Charles said firmly. "You didn't ask for any of this. And yes, I was heading to work, but some things are more important than being on time." Even as he said it, Charles felt the weight of those words. Emma's face flashed in his mind, her trying to hide her disappointment when he'd had to tell her they couldn't afford her class trip. The look she'd given him when he'd promised that the next overtime check would change everything. He'd just thrown that promise away. But he'd thrown it away to save 2 lives. That had to count for something. It had to. As they drove through the storm, the rain finally beginning to lighten, Charles Jones had no idea that this choice, this moment of deciding that compassion mattered more than consequences, would reshape both their lives in ways neither of them could imagine. He had no idea that Doris wasn't just a pregnant woman who needed help. He had no idea about the husband she'd left, the money she'd hidden, the reason she'd been running when her car stalled in that flood. He had no idea that by the time the sun set today, he would lose his job, gain an unexpected ally, and discover that sometimes doing the right thing costs everything, and gives back even more. But first, they had to get through this storm. The emergency room entrance of County General Hospital was chaos controlled by exhausted efficiency. Charles pulled up to the ambulance bay, hazard lights flashing, and within seconds 2 nurses with a wheelchair were at the passenger door. They moved with practiced urgency, assessing Doris even as they transferred her from the car. 34 weeks, contractions 7 minutes apart, possible premature labor. One of the nurses rattled off to her colleague. "Let's get her to L&D stat." "Wait," Doris called out, reaching for Charles even as they began wheeling her away. I don't have my phone. It was in the car when. I need to call someone. I need." "We'll help you with that inside, sweetheart," the other nurse assured her. "Let's just get you checked out first." "Charles." Doris's voice was desperate now, and something in that desperation made him abandon his plan to just leave and get to work. He jogged alongside the wheelchair. "I'm here. What do you need?" "Don't leave yet. Please. I don't have anyone else." The words hit Charles like a punch to the gut. Hey, I'm not known for being sensible, Charles tried to joke, but it fell flat. The reality of what he'd done, what it had cost him, was starting to sink in with the weight of concrete. "You lost your job, didn't you?" Doris said it so simply, so certainly, that Charles didn't even try to deny it. "Probably. I was already on thin ice with my boss. Being this late," he shrugged, trying to make it seem less catastrophic than it felt. "Oh God." Doris covered her face with her hands. "Oh God, this is my fault. You lost your job because of me." "No," Charles said firmly. "I lost my job because I made a choice. You didn't force me to stop. I stopped because it was the right thing to do." "But your family, you said something about your daughter." Charles had forgotten he'd mentioned Emma during the chaos of getting Doris into the car. "My daughter, yeah. Emma. She's 13. It's just the 2 of us." He didn't know why he was telling her this. Maybe because they'd shared something intense together, trauma bonded, the therapists called it. Maybe because she was looking at him like he was a hero when he felt like a fool. "Just the 2 of you," Doris echoed. "Like it's going to be just me and..." She placed a hand on her belly. "Just me and this baby." There was something in the way she said it that caught Charles's attention. Not sadness, exactly. Something harder. Something like relief mixed with fear. "The father?" Charles asked gently. "Is why I was leaving," Doris said quietly, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. "Why I was trying to get to the hospital in a storm instead of waiting it out. I was hoping to disappear before he realized I was gone." Charles felt a chill that had nothing to do with his still damp clothes. Doris. His name is Marcus Webb. Maybe you've heard of him? Webb Construction. They've built half the commercial buildings in this county. There was bitter pride in her voice. Marcus Webb, pillar of the community, deacon at First Methodist, donor to every charity in town. And in private, the man who put me in the hospital twice during this pregnancy. The man who told me last night that if I didn't get rid of it, her voice broke on the word, that he'd make sure I regretted it for the rest of my miserable life. Charles felt his hands curl into fists. Jesus Christ. So I packed what I could carry, took the $3,000 I'd been hiding in a hollowed-out book for the last 6 months, and I ran. I was going to check in at the hospital, use a fake name, have the baby somewhere safe, and then figure out how to disappear. Doris laughed, a hollow sound. But I guess Mother Nature had other plans. Does he know where you are? I don't think so. He was at a conference in Atlanta, supposed to be back tonight. By then, I'd planned to be long gone. But now, she gestured to the hospital room, the monitors, the 4 keeping her tethered. I am trapped. And once he finds out I'm here. He won't hurt you again, Charles said with a conviction that surprised him. Not while you're in this hospital. Not while. He stopped himself. Not while what? He was just some guy who'd help her. He had no right to make promises he couldn't keep. He had his own problems. His own daughter to worry about. But looking at Doris, seeing the fear beneath her attempt at bravery, Charles couldn't walk away. Not yet. Let me make some calls, he said. There are people who can help. Domestic violence resources, legal aid. Marcus knows all those people, Doris interrupted. He donates to the women's shelter. He's friends with half the lawyers in town. You don't understand. He's got connections everywhere. That's why I was trying to run. It's the only way. Before Charles could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. Morrison's Manufacturing. His stomach dropped. I should take this, he said quietly. Go, Doris urged. Maybe you can explain. Maybe they'll understand. Charles stepped into the hallway, already knowing what he'd hear but hoping he was wrong. Jones. Frank Morrison's voice was hard as granite. Where the hell are you? Frank, I can explain. You've got 60 seconds. Charles took a breath and explained. The flood, the pregnant woman, the hospital. He spoke quickly, clearly, leaving out nothing. When he finished, there was a long silence on the other end. You done? Frank asked finally. Yes, sir. Then here's what's going to happen. You're going to come to the plant right now, clean out your locker, and turn in your badge. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you, minus the hours you didn't work today. Frank, please. I warned you, Jones. I gave you chance after chance. You chose to play hero instead of being an employee. That's your right. But it's also my right to fire someone who can't show up to work on time. I understand, Charles said, though his throat felt like it was closing. But Frank, the woman I helped, she's in real danger. Her husband. Not my problem. Not yours either, unless you're looking to get involved in something that'll blow back on you. My advice? Walk away. You've got your own kid to take care of. Frank paused. Or you did, before you decided someone else's emergency was more important. The line went dead. Charles stood in the hospital corridor, phone still pressed to his ear, the reality of his situation crashing over him like the floodwater had crashed over the road. He was unemployed. Rent was due in 2 weeks. Emma's school trip deposit was due next Friday. The car needed an inspection. The electricity bill was already overdue. He'd sacrificed everything to save a stranger. And he'd do it again. That realization, that despite the fear coursing through him, despite the very real consequences, he didn't regret his choice, steadied him somehow. Charles straightened his shoulders and walked back into Doris's room. She took one look at his face and knew. I'm so sorry. Not your fault, Charles said, and he meant it. Look, I need to go deal with some things. But I'm going to leave you my number. If you need anything, if Webb shows up, if you need help, anything at all, you call me. Okay. Why? Doris asked, and there was genuine confusion in her voice. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. You've already lost so much because of me. Why would you? Because 4 years ago, my wife left us, Charles said quietly. She walked out on me and Emma without looking back. And you know what the worst part was? All our friends, her family, my co-workers, everyone acted like it was understandable. Like a woman leaving her family was just something that happened sometimes, and maybe I'd driven her to it. Nobody helped. Nobody even asked if we were okay. He met Doris's eyes. You're alone, pregnant, and running from someone who hurt you. If I walk away now, I'm no better than all those people who walked away from us. So yeah, I'm unemployed and probably screwed financially, but at least I can sleep at night knowing I didn't abandon someone who needed help. Doris was crying openly now, but she was also smiling. You're a good man, Charles Jones. I'm an unemployed man with questionable judgment, Charles corrected, but he managed a small smile. But I appreciate the sentiment. He wrote his number on the whiteboard by her bed, then hesitated. Doris, about Webb, you need to file a police report. Document everything. Get a restraining order. That's just a piece of paper. It won't stop him. Maybe not. But it's a start. And it creates a legal record. If anything happens. When anything happens, Doris corrected grimly, then there's documentation. It matters. Trust me. Doris nodded slowly. Okay. I'll talk to the social worker they mentioned earlier. I'll try. That's all anyone can do. Charles moved toward the door, then stopped. Hey, Doris. What you're doing, keeping your baby despite everything, that takes guts. That baby's lucky to have you. I hope you're right, Doris whispered. As Charles drove away from the hospital, his phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Dad, Mr. Clarkson said you'd call the school if you were running late. Is everything okay? Charles pulled over and called his daughter. He owed her the truth. Dad. Emma's voice was anxious. Where are you? I'm okay, sweetheart. But I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen all the way through before you react, okay? Okay. Emma's voice was small now, preparing for bad news. Charles told her everything. The woman in the flood, the hospital, the firing. He didn't sugarcoat it. Emma was old enough to handle the truth. When he finished, there was a long silence. Emma. So you lost your job. It wasn't a question. Yes. Another pause. Then, did you save her? The woman and her baby. Yeah. They're safe. Then you did the right thing, Dad. Emma's voice was firm, mature beyond her years. Mom used to say you cared too much about other people. But I think she was wrong. I think the world needs more people who care too much, even if it means we can't afford stuff sometimes. Charles felt tears prick his eyes. You're pretty amazing, you know that. I learned from the best, Emma said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. Besides, Washington, D.C. has been there for 200 years. It'll still be there next year, right? Right, Charles managed. Come home, Dad. We'll figure it out. We always do. Charles wiped his eyes, put the car in drive, and headed home. He had no job, mounting bills, and no clear path forward. But he had Emma, and he'd helped save 2 lives today. Tomorrow, he'd start figuring out how to pick up the pieces. He had no idea that tomorrow would bring Marcus Webb to his door, or that the choice he'd made today would entangle him in something far more dangerous than he'd imagined. But tonight, driving home through the still drizzling rain, Charles Jones allowed himself to believe that doing the right thing might actually be enough. Charles made it home by 11 a.m., exhausted and still damp around the edges. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades, but Emma had decorated their small space with thrift store finds and DIY art projects until it actually felt like home. A banner she'd made in 5th grade still hung over the kitchen doorway. Jones family, population 2, awesomeness level 100. He'd just changed into dry clothes when someone pounded on the door, not knocked, pounded, with the kind of aggression that made Charles's instincts flare. Charles Jones. The voice was deep, authoritative, used to being obeyed. Charles opened the door to find a man in an expensive suit standing in his shabby hallway, looking as out of place as a Ferrari in a junkyard. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of tan that came from golf courses, not construction sites. Behind him stood 2 younger men in cheaper suits, hired muscle trying to look professional. "Who's asking?" Charles said, though he already knew. He'd seen Marcus Webb's face on billboards all over town. Webb Construction, building the future. "Marcus Webb," the man confirmed, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I believe you met my wife this morning." Wife. Not ex-wife. Not estranged wife. Doris was still legally bound to this man, still in his power in ways that a hospital room couldn't protect against. "I helped a woman in trouble," Charles said carefully. "Didn't catch her last name." "Don't play dumb, Jones. I've already talked to the hospital. They're very helpful when you're a major donor." Webb's smile turned sharp. "Doris is my wife. She's pregnant with my child. And she's not in her right mind. Pregnancy hormones, postpartum depression starting early, whatever the doctors want to call it. The point is, she ran off this morning in a storm, put herself and my baby in danger, and you encourage her delusions by taking her to the hospital instead of bringing her home." "She needed medical attention," Charles said, his voice level but his hands curling into fists at his sides. "She was in premature labor. Because she was driving around in a goddamn flood instead of staying safe at home where she belonged." Webb's composure cracked for just a moment, showing the temper beneath the polished exterior. He reined it in quickly. "Look, Jones. I understand you thought you were doing a good deed. You're a single father, you work hard, you're trying to do right by your daughter." Charles felt ice in his veins. "How do you know about my daughter?" "I know a lot of things. It's my business to know things." Webb stepped closer, and Charles could smell expensive cologne mixed with an underlying hint of cigar smoke. "I know you just lost your job at Morrison's. I know your rent is $850 a month and you're already 2 weeks late. I know Emma goes to Jefferson Middle School and she's on the honor roll despite everything you've put her through." The threat was implicit but crystal clear. "My family is none of your business, but your family is very much mine. What do you want?" Charles asked quietly. "I want you to forget you met my wife. I want you to delete her number if she gave it to you. I want you to understand that Doris and I are working through a rough patch, like all married couples do, and that your interference is making things worse, not better." Webb pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card and $100 bills. "Consider this a thank you for helping her this morning, and a reminder that your priority should be taking care of your own family, not involving yourself in mine." Charles looked at the money. $1,000. He could pay his rent, put food on the table, maybe even save the school trip deposit. All he had to do was walk away from a woman being abused by the man currently trying to buy his silence. "I can't accept this," Charles said. Webb's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake." "Probably. I've made a lot of those lately." Charles stepped back, preparing to close the door. "Your wife is safe in the hospital. What you do from here is between you, her, and the law. But I'm not going to take money to pretend I didn't see a pregnant woman terrified of her husband." "You self-righteous son of a..." Webb caught himself, his jaw working as he visibly struggled to control his temper. "You think you're a hero? You're not. You're just another nobody trying to feel important by sticking his nose where it doesn't belong. And you know what happens to nobodies who cross people like me. I imagine you're about to tell me. They disappear into their irrelevant little lives. They can't find work because suddenly nobody's hiring. Their landlords remember all those late rent payments and start eviction proceedings. Their kids' schools receive anonymous reports about neglect, and CPS starts asking questions." Webb's voice was soft now, almost gentle, which made the threats feel even more menacing. Their whole world falls apart, and they can never quite figure out why. Charles felt genuine fear then, not for himself, but for Emma. This man could follow through on every threat he'd made. Webb had money, connections, power. Charles had a daughter to protect and no job to protect her with. But he also had Doris's terrified face burned into his memory. Her hand on her belly, protecting her child even as she trembled in floodwater. Her relief when he'd promised not to leave her alone. "Get out of my home," Charles said quietly. Webb stared at him for a long moment, then laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "You're either very brave or very stupid. I haven't decided which." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing, Jones. Doris is being discharged tomorrow morning. I'll be picking her up personally, taking her home where she belongs. If you contact her, if you try to interfere, if you even think about her again, well, I've already explained what happens then." "She doesn't have to go with you," Charles said. "She can stay at the hospital, get a restraining order, press charges." "With what evidence?" Webb spread his hands. "My wife is emotionally unstable from pregnancy. She had an unfortunate accident-prone few months, fell down the stairs twice, walked into a door. I have doctors' reports confirming her mental state, recommending rest and support from her loving husband. Who do you think the court will believe? The pillar of the community, or the unemployed single father with an axe to grind?" He was right, and Charles knew it. That was the worst part, knowing that Webb would probably get away with it because he had the resources to make his version of reality stick. After Webb and his goons left, Charles sat heavily on his threadbare couch, mind racing. He pulled out his phone and called the hospital, asking for Doris's room. After several transfers, a nurse finally picked up. "I'm sorry, sir, but Ms. Webb isn't taking calls right now. She's resting. Can you tell her that Charles called? And that she has options. She doesn't have to." "Sir, I really can't relay messages. If you're family, you can visit during regular hours." "I'm not family, I'm—" Charles stopped. What was he? A stranger who'd help her once? Someone who decided her problems were his problems despite having no logical reason to do so? Never mind. "Thank you." He hung up and stared at his phone, feeling helpless and stupid and angry all at once. Then he did what he probably should have done hours ago. He called the police. The officer who took his call was polite but skeptical. "Sir, what you're describing is a domestic situation between a married couple. Without evidence of a crime or Mrs. Webb filing a complaint herself, there's not much we can do. She told me he beat her. Twice. While she was pregnant. Did you see injuries?" "No, but—" "Did she file a report?" "No, she's afraid." "Then I'm sorry, but without a victim willing to press charges or evidence of immediate danger, we can't intervene in a marital dispute." The officer's voice softened slightly. "Look, I appreciate that you're concerned. But sometimes people in these situations, they're not ready to leave. And if we come in guns blazing based on hearsay, it can make things worse for them." "So you're telling me to do nothing? Just let her go back to a man who hospitalized her?" "I'm telling you that domestic situations are complicated, and the best thing you can do is make sure Mrs. Webb knows about resources available to her. There's a women's shelter on Oak Street, legal aid downtown. If she decides she wants help, there are people who can provide it. But she has to be the one to make that choice." Charles thanked the officer and hung up, frustration burning in his chest. Everyone kept telling him this wasn't his problem, wasn't his business, wasn't something he could fix. And maybe they were right. Maybe he was just some nobody with a hero complex trying to save people who didn't want to be saved. But then he thought about Emma, about raising her alone after Jennifer left, about the caseworker who'd shown up 3 weeks after Jennifer disappeared, responding to an anonymous report about a single father struggling to cope. Charles had been terrified they'd take Emma away. It had taken months to prove he was a capable parent, months of scrutiny and judgment and fear. Someone had tried to hurt him by weaponizing the system meant to protect children. Now Webb was threatening to do the same thing. The difference was, Charles had been innocent. But that hadn't mattered. The accusation alone had been enough to turn his world upside down for months. If Webb made good on his threats, even false allegations could destroy everything Charles had built for Emma. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Hello. Charles. It's Doris. Her voice was barely a whisper, strained and urgent. I don't have much time. They moved me to a private room. Marcus is doing, I'm sure. He's coming tomorrow morning to take me home. I know. He was here. At my apartment. Oh God. Charles, I'm so sorry. I never meant to drag you into this. Stop apologizing. None of this is your fault. Charles stood, pacing his small living room. Doris, you don't have to go with him. There are shelters, legal resources. You don't understand. Marcus doesn't just make threats. He follows through. Her voice cracked. 3 years ago, before we were married, I tried to leave him. I went to stay with my sister in Ohio. Within a week, her house burned down. Faulty wiring, the fire marshal said. My sister lost everything. She still doesn't know it was Marcus, and I can never tell her because then she'd know it was my fault. Charles felt sick. Doris. 6 months after we got married, I told my best friend from college what was happening. She wanted to help, said she'd pay for a lawyer. 2 weeks later, she got fired from her job for financial irregularities. Money was disappearing from accounts she managed. She swore she didn't take it, but they had proof. Marcus ruined her career, her reputation, everything. She stopped returning my calls after that. Jesus Christ. So you see why I can't let you help me? Why I can't let anyone help me? Everyone who gets close to me, everyone who tries to stand up to Marcus, he destroys them. And he's always careful. It's never traceable back to him. He's got lawyers, investigators, people who owe him favors. He's untouchable. Nobody's untouchable, Charles said, but even he could hear the doubt in his voice. You have a daughter, Doris said softly. Emma. Marcus told me about her when he called the hospital earlier. He said she's a smart girl, lots of potential. Said it would be a shame if anything happened to interfere with her bright future. Charles's blood ran cold. He threatened Emma. Not directly. He never does. But I know what he meant, and so do you. Doris was crying now. Please, Charles. I'm begging you. Forget you met me. Delete this number. When Marcus picks me up tomorrow, let him. Don't try to contact me. Don't try to help me. Just let it go. And then what? You go back to a man who beats you. You raise your child in that environment. I'll figure something out. Eventually. When he's not watching so closely. When enough time has passed that he thinks he's broken me completely. Her voice was hollow now, defeated. I've survived this long. I'll keep surviving. That's not living, Doris. That's just existing. In fear. In pain. It's better than getting people I care about killed. She took a shaky breath. I called to warn you. To tell you that I'm grateful for what you did, but I'm releasing you from any obligation you feel. I'm telling you officially, leave me alone. If Marcus ever asks, you can honestly say I told you to stay away. Doris, wait. But she'd already hung up. Charles stood in his living room, phone still pressed to his ear, the dial tone buzzing mockingly. Everything in him screamed to do something, to call the police again, to show up at the hospital, to find some way to help. But what could he do that wouldn't make things worse? What could one unemployed single father do against a man with Marcus Webb's resources and connections? The answer, he realized with bitter clarity, was nothing. Absolutely nothing. The front door opened, and Emma came in, backpack slung over her shoulder, hair damp from the rain that had started up again. She took one look at her father's face and frowned. Dad, what's wrong? Charles forced a smile. Nothing, sweetheart. How was school? Dad. Emma dropped her backpack and crossed her arms in a gesture so reminiscent of her mother that it made Charles's chest ache. I'm 13, not 6. I know when something's wrong. What happened? Charles considered lying, protecting her from the ugliness of the situation. But Emma had been through too much already. She deserved honesty. He told her everything: Doris's call, Webb's threats, the feeling of helplessness that was eating at him. Emma listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When he finished, Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised him. Tell me about her. About Doris. Not just the scary stuff. What's she like? Charles thought about it. She's brave. Scared out of her mind, but brave. She's trying to protect her baby even though it means sacrificing herself. He paused, remembering the moment he'd lifted her from the floodwater, the way she'd held on like he was the only solid thing in a drowning world. She reminds me of you, actually. When your mom left, and you tried so hard to be strong for both of us even though you were just a kid. Emma's eyes glistened. Then we can't just abandon her, Dad. We can't. Emma, this man threatened you. Threatened to call CPS, to destroy our lives. I can't put you at risk. I'm already at risk, Emma interrupted. We are broke, you lost your job, we might get evicted anyway. And if we do nothing, if we just let this happen because we are scared, then what does that make us? What does that teach me about standing up for what's right? It teaches you to survive. Sometimes survival means making hard choices. Like Mom did. Emma's voice was sharp now. She chose survival. She chose easy. She walked away from us because we were too hard, too complicated, too much work. Is that who you want to be? The words hit like a slap. That's not fair, Emma. No, what's not fair is that woman and her baby going back to someone who hurts them while good people do nothing because they're scared. Emma wiped her eyes angrily. You taught me that fear is normal but courage is choosing to do the right thing anyway. You taught me that. And now you're telling me to ignore it. Charles sank onto the couch, feeling the weight of every terrible choice pressing down on him. His daughter was right, and he hated it. Hated that she had to be the one with clarity while he wallowed in fear and doubt. Even if you're right, even if we should help, I don't know how, Charles admitted. Webb has lawyers, money, connections. He's thought of everything. And Doris is legally his wife. Without her cooperation, without evidence, there's nothing we can do that won't make things worse. Then we find evidence, Emma said simply. He was running out of options and running out of time. His rent was now 3 weeks overdue, and his landlord had left a notice on his door about eviction proceedings. Emma's school had called about the Washington, D.C. trip deposit. They could hold her spot for 1 more week, but after that, they have to give it to someone on the waiting list. Charles was sitting at his kitchen table, surrounded by printouts of Emma's research and past due bills, when his phone rang. Unknown number again. Charles Jones. A woman's voice, older, crisp with authority. Speaking. My name is Patricia Morrison. I believe you've been trying to find out about my sister, Doris. Charles sat up straight. Yes, How did you get my number? My sister gave it to me. She called me yesterday. First time I've heard from her in over a year. She told me what you did for her, what you've risked. Patricia's voice softened slightly. She also told me that Marcus has you under surveillance. He's documenting every move you make, building a case to support his theory that you're obsessed with his wife. He's planning to use it to get a restraining order against you and to file harassment charges. Of course he is, Charles said bitterly. Which is why I'm calling. I need you to stop investigating. Stop asking questions. Stop trying to help my sister. Charles felt something in him deflate. So you're on his side? No, Patricia said sharply. I'm trying to keep you alive long enough to actually help her. You're being too obvious, too direct. Marcus has people watching you. Everything you're doing is making him more paranoid and more dangerous. Then what am I supposed to do? Just give up. You're supposed to let me help. I've spent 3 years putting together a case against Marcus Webb. I've got financial records, witness statements, connections to organized crime figures in 3 states. I've been working with a federal investigator who's been building a RICO case against several prominent businessmen in the region, and Marcus Webb is on that list. Charles couldn't believe what he was hearing. Why didn't Doris know about this? Because the moment my sister knows, she becomes a liability. Marcus would see it on her face, in her behavior. The only way to keep her safe was to keep her in the dark. Patricia's voice tightened with emotion. 3 years I've been doing this. 3 years of watching my sister suffer, not being able to contact her, not being able to help her. Do you know what that's been like? I'm sorry, Charles said, and he meant it. But now she's pregnant, and the baby changes everything. Marcus has escalated. The violence is worse. And when that baby comes... Patricia trailed off. I can't wait anymore. The investigation needs to move forward now, even if it's not perfect, even if there are gaps in the evidence. What do you need from me? I need you to get Doris out of that house. Tomorrow night, Marcus has a business dinner in the city. He'll be gone from 7 to 10, maybe 11. It's the best window we'll have. But Doris won't leave on her own. She's too scared, too broken down. She needs someone she trusts to convince her. She barely knows me, Charles protested. But she trusts you. You saved her life. You risked everything for her. That means something. Patricia paused. Charles, I can't do this part. If I show up, Marcus will know something's wrong. His security system would flag me immediately. But you're just some nobody he's keeping tabs on. You show up, you could claim you didn't know she'd be home, that you just wanted to talk. It gives her plausible deniability if things go wrong. And if I can get her out? There's a safe house waiting. Federal protection. Once she's there, she can give her statement to the investigators, and they'll move forward with the arrest. But we need her voluntary cooperation. We need her to choose this. Charles thought about Emma, about the risk he'd be taking. Webb was already watching him. If Charles showed up at his house, tried to take his wife, even with her consent, it could be twisted into something criminal. Kidnapping, harassment, breaking and entering. But he also thought about Doris, trapped in that mansion with a man who'd already hurt her twice. Thought about the baby that would be born into that environment. I'll do it, Charles said. Thank you. Patricia's relief was audible. I'm texting you the address and the security code for the side entrance. Doris gave it to me. 7:30 tomorrow night. Get her out, bring her to the address I'll send you, and then disappear from this situation. Let the federal investigators handle it from there. What about the retaliation? Webb will know I was involved. Once he's arrested, he won't be in a position to retaliate. And if he tries to send someone after you, that's additional charges. But you need to trust the process, Charles. Can you do that? Charles thought about all the times he trusted the process. Family court when Jennifer left, CPS when someone reported him, Morrison's Manufacturing's HR department when he tried to explain why he was late. The process had failed him every single time. But what choice did he have? Yeah, he said. I can do that. After hanging up, Charles sat in silence for a long time. Then he called Emma into the kitchen and told her everything. This is insane, Emma said when he finished. Dad, this is legitimately insane. You're going to break into a rich guy's house to convince his wife to leave him. I'm not breaking in. I have the security code. That he doesn't know you have, which legally is still breaking and entering. Emma ran her hands through her hair, a gesture of stress she'd picked up from him. And what if it's a trap? What if Patricia Morrison is working with Marcus? What if this whole thing is a setup to catch you in a criminal act so he can have you arrested and get you away from us permanently? The thought had occurred to Charles. It's possible. And you're going anyway. I have to. Charles met his daughter's eyes. Emma, if I don't do this, If I play it safe and let Doris stay in that situation, I'll never forgive myself. And worse, I'll teach you that fear is more important than doing what's right. Is that the lesson you want to learn?" Emma glared at him, then suddenly laughed, a frustrated, slightly hysterical sound. "You're using my own words against me. That's really unfair." "Life's unfair, kiddo." "Ooh." Emma slouched in her chair.
Fine.
"But I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not." "Not to the house," Emma interrupted. "But I'm waiting in the car nearby. If something goes wrong, if you need help, if—" her voice cracked. "I'm not staying home wondering if my dad's been arrested or worse. If you're doing this stupid, crazy, dangerous thing, then I'm at least going to be close enough to call for help if you need it." Charles wanted to argue, but he understood. If their situations were reversed, he wouldn't want to sit at home wondering either. "Okay," he said finally. "But you stay in the car, doors locked, phone ready to call 911. At the first sign of trouble, you drive away and get somewhere safe. Promise me." "I promise," Emma said. Then she hugged him fiercely. "Please don't get killed doing something noble, Dad. I really need you to not do that." "I'll do my best," Charles said, holding his daughter tight and praying he could keep that promise. The next evening, Charles and Emma drove to the Heights neighborhood as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood red. The Webb mansion sat on 2 acres of manicured lawn, all wrought iron gates and security cameras. Charles parked 2 blocks away, in front of a house with a "for sale" sign, empty, unlikely to have residents who'd question their presence. 7:28, Emma said, checking her phone. "Marcus's car left 15 minutes ago according to the tracker app." "What tracker app?" Emma looked sheepish. "I maybe found his license plate number through his company's website, and maybe signed up for a free trial of a GPS tracking service, and maybe used some information from a data breach to connect his plate to his current location." "Emma, do you want to know where he is or not?" Charles decided not to ask any more questions. Sometimes plausible deniability was a gift. At exactly 7:30, Charles got out of the car. He dressed carefully, jeans, a plain jacket, baseball cap pulled low. Nothing threatening, but nothing too memorable either. Just another guy in the suburbs. The walk to the Webb mansion felt like walking to his own execution. Every step, Charles expected security lights to blaze on, alarms to sound, police to appear. But Patricia's security code worked on the side gate, and suddenly he was in the Webb's backyard, approaching the house like a thief in the growing darkness. The code worked on the side door too, and Charles found himself standing in a mudroom that probably cost more than his entire apartment. Expensive coats hung on designer hooks. Shoes lined up in neat rows, each pair worth a week of his former salary. "Doris," he called softly, moving into the house. The interior was magazine perfect, all white marble and modern furniture, art that probably cost 6 figures on the walls. But it felt cold, sterile. More like a museum than a home. No clutter, no personality, no signs that real people lived here. "Doris," he called again, louder this time. A sound from upstairs, footsteps, rapid and light. Then Doris appeared at the top of the staircase, and Charles almost didn't recognize her. She was wearing an expensive dress that couldn't hide the bruises on her arms. Her face was made up carefully, but makeup couldn't quite conceal the shadow of a healing black eye or the split in her lower lip. "Charles." She looked terrified. "What are you? You can't be here. Marcus has cameras everywhere." "Heal." "I know about the cameras. Your sister sent me." Charles moved to the base of the stairs. "Patricia. She's been building a case against Marcus for 3 years. She has federal investigators ready to move forward, but they need your statement. They need you safe first." Doris's face crumpled. "Patricia. My sister." She sank down on the stairs, one hand on her belly. "She's been, all this time I thought. She's been working to free you. But we don't have much time. Marcus could come back early. We need to go. Now." "I can't." Doris shook her head. "He'll find me. He always finds me. Not this time. Federal protection. Doris. Witness security. A new life for you and your baby. Charles climbed a few stairs, extending his hand. But you have to choose this. You have to decide that you and your child deserve better than this.
I am scared, Doris whispered.
I know. But you're also brave. I saw that in the floodwater, remember? You held on. You survived. You protected your baby even when you thought you were dying. Charles took another step closer. That same strength, you can use it now. One decision. One moment of courage. That's all it takes. Doris looked at him, then down her belly, then back at the house around her, the beautiful prison that had trapped her for so long. Charles saw the moment she decided. Saw her spine straighten, her jaw set, her hand reach for his. Okay, she said. Okay, let's go. They were halfway across the backyard when the lights blazed on. Marcus Webb stood by the side gate, blocking their exit. He wasn't alone. The same two men from before flanked him, and they all looked far too calm for people who just caught an intruder. I have to hand it to you, Jones, Marcus said conversationally. You're predictable. Patricia calls you, feeds you some story about federal investigators and safe houses, and you come running to play hero. He smiled. There is no federal investigation. There's just my sister-in-law, who's been trying to turn my wife against me for years, and a gullible fool who fell for the bait. Charles felt his stomach drop. Doris, run. Where? Marcus laughed. The only exit is through me, and I've already called the police. They'll be here in about 3 minutes. Just enough time for me to subdue an intruder who broke into my home and attempted to kidnap my pregnant wife. I came willingly, Doris said, her voice shaking but determined. I wanted to leave. You're not in your right mind, sweetheart. The doctors have documented your emotional instability. Postpartum depression, paranoid delusions about me trying to hurt you. Marcus's voice turned cold. Everyone will believe me, Doris. They always do. And you'll be back home, under my care, with medication to help you through these difficult times. He was going to drug her. Lock her up. Make her a prisoner in her own mind until she was too broken to resist. Charles stepped in front of Doris, placing himself between her and Marcus. You'll have to go through me. That can be arranged, Marcus said pleasantly. One of his men cracked his knuckles, stepping forward. Dad. Emma's voice cut through the tension, high and panicked. Dad, help. Everyone turned to see Emma being escorted into the backyard by a third man Charles hadn't seen, one who must have been watching the car, waiting. He had his hand clamped on Emma's shoulder, not quite bruising but clearly restraining. Let her go, Charles said, his voice deadly quiet. When you leave my property, Marcus countered. Leave now, forget you ever met my wife, and your daughter walks away unharmed. Stay, and we'll add her to the list of casualties. Patricia's house fire wasn't an accident, Jones. I have people who can make anything look like an accident. Charles looked at Emma, saw the fear in her eyes but also something else, determination. She was trying to tell him something with her expression, but he couldn't read it. Then he heard it. Sirens in the distance, getting closer. That'll be the police, Marcus said. 3 minutes. I told you. But Emma was smiling now, just slightly, and her hand was visible behind her back, holding her phone up so Charles could see the screen. 911, call connected, 8:47. She'd called the police before Marcus had, which meant everything Marcus had just said, every threat, every admission, had been recorded and transmitted directly to emergency services. Charles smiled too. Yeah, those will be the police. But I don't think they're coming for me. Marcus's expression flickered with uncertainty. What did you do? My daughter's smarter than both of us combined, Charles said. And she's been recording this whole conversation. Bullshit. I have signal jammers. That apparently don't work on all frequencies, Emma said sweetly. Dad, the 911 operator wants to know if we are in immediate danger. The man holding Emma suddenly looked a lot less confident. The other two took a step back. Marcus's face went from uncertainty to rage in a heartbeat. "You stupid!" He lunged forward, going for Doris. Charles moved without thinking, putting himself in the path of a man who outweighed him by 50 pounds and had nothing left to lose. They collided hard, going down in a tangle of limbs on the expensive patio. Marcus fought like a man possessed, landing a punch that split Charles's lip, another that cracked against his ribs. But Charles had spent years doing construction work, had the kind of wiry strength that came from hard labor and harder living. And more than that, he had something to fight for. Emma was here. Doris was here. He wasn't going to let Marcus hurt any of them. He managed to pin Marcus down just as the police came flooding into the backyard, weapons drawn, shouting commands. "Hands where we can see them. Don't move. Get on the ground." Charles rolled off Marcus, hands in the air, face down on the concrete as commanded. He could hear Emma screaming that he was the victim, Doris crying that Marcus had attacked them, Marcus shouting about intruders and self-defense. But Charles could also hear one of the officers talking into his radio. "Yeah, we need a detective down here. Domestic situation, but dispatch has a recording. Sounds like threats, assault, possible witness intimidation. This is bigger than a simple B&E." It took an hour to sort out. An hour of statements and explanations, of paramedics checking everyone for injuries, of Detective Sarah Chen, no relation to Rebecca Chen, but she listened very carefully when Charles mentioned that name, taking detailed notes about everything they'd uncovered. Patricia Morrison arrived with a lawyer and actual documents from an actual federal investigation. Marcus Webb was arrested on charges of assault, witness intimidation, conspiracy, and half a dozen other counts that the detective rattled off while reading him his rights. As they put Marcus in the back of a police car, he looked directly at Charles through the window. His expression promised vengeance, promised that this wasn't over, promised that Charles had made an enemy who would never stop coming for him. But Charles just stood there, Emma on one side and Doris on the other, and he realized he didn't care. Let Marcus try. Let him spend his money on lawyers and threats. Charles had done the right thing, and sometimes that had to be enough. "Thank you," Doris said quietly, watching them drive her husband away. "You saved us. Again." "We saved each other," Charles corrected. He looked at Emma. "Team effort." "Speaking of which," Emma said, "you're paying for therapy after this. I just helped take down an abuser and got grabbed by hired muscle. I'm going to have issues." Despite everything, the pain, the fear, the exhaustion, Charles laughed. Because his daughter was going to be okay. They were both going to be okay. 3 weeks later, Charles sat in a coffee shop across from Thomas Garrett, the former Webb construction employee who'd warned him to walk away. Thomas had called him out of the blue, said he had something to show him. This, Thomas slid a folder across the table, is a lawsuit. Civil case against Marcus Webb for wrongful termination, defamation, and conspiracy to blacklist me from the industry. My lawyer thinks we've got a real shot now that he's facing criminal charges. Charles flipped through the documents. "I'm glad for you. Really. But why tell me?" "Because there are 6 other people filing similar suits. Rebecca Chen. A business competitor Webb tried to ruin. A journalist who wrote a critical article. Others." Thomas leaned forward. "We are building a class action case. And the lawyer thinks you and Doris should join." "For what? He didn't really damage me professionally. I lost my job before I even met Doris." "But he threatened you, harassed you, put your daughter in danger. That's intentional infliction of emotional distress, among other things." Thomas's expression was serious. "Look, I know lawsuits are messy and time-consuming. But Webb's going to prison for a while. Yeah, but he'll still have his money. He'll still have his company. And the day he gets out, he'll start coming for everyone who put him away. Unless we take everything from him first." Charles thought about Marcus's face in that police car. The promise of retribution. "I need to think about it." "Fair enough. But Charles, men like Webb, they don't stop. Even from prison, they have reach. The only way to really stop him is to make sure he has nothing left to reach with. After Thomas left, Charles sat with his coffee and thought about revenge versus justice, about protection versus retaliation. His phone buzzed, a text from Emma. Job interview went okay. Call me. The interview had gone better than okay. A small construction company, family-owned, had heard about what happened. The news had covered it extensively, and had offered Charles a job on the spot. "We need people with integrity," the owner had said. "People who do the right thing even when it costs them." The pay wasn't great, but it was steady. Benefits included enough to keep their apartment, save for Emma's school trip, maybe even build towards something better. Charles was thinking about how to respond to Emma when Doris appeared at his table. She was showing now, her belly prominent beneath a soft blue sweater. She looked healthier than the last time he'd seen her, color in her cheeks, light in her eyes. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. "Of course not." Doris settled across from him with a sigh. "Baby's getting heavy. For more weeks until my due date." "How are you holding up?" "Better than I thought I would. Patricia's been amazing. I'm staying with her while I figure out my next steps. The investigators have been respectful. The lawyer handling my divorce says we should be able to finalize it before the baby comes." She smiled. "I'm going to be okay, Charles. We are going to be okay." "I'm glad." "I heard Thomas Garrett approached you about the lawsuit." "Word travels fast. It's a small world, and you're kind of famous now." "Single dad risks everything to save pregnant stranger." Doris quoted the newspaper headline with a wry smile. "You're a hero." "I'm really not. I just did what anyone should have done." "But most people wouldn't have. That's what makes it heroic." Doris placed her hands on her belly. "I wanted to ask you something. Well, to offer something, actually. When the baby's born, I'm going to need help. Patricia's great, but she works full-time. I don't have a lot of friends. Marcus made sure of that. And I was thinking, if you're looking for extra work, I could use help with childcare. Part-time, flexible hours, decent pay." Charles blinked. "You want me to be your nanny?" "I want someone I trust around my child. Someone who's proven they'll protect her no matter what the cost. Someone who understands what it means to be a single parent." Doris met his eyes. "I know you have your own daughter, your own life. But I thought maybe, if our schedules could work out, we could help each other. You need income, I need trustworthy help. Emma could even come with you sometimes if she wanted. I'd love for my daughter to have positive role models around." "You know it's a girl." Doris smiled. Found out. Charles accepted Doris's offer, and over the next 2 months, their lives intertwined in ways neither had anticipated. When baby Grace was born, 6 pounds, 3 ounces, with Doris's dark hair and a surprisingly loud cry, Charles was in the waiting room with Emma and Patricia, pacing nervously like he was the father instead of just a friend. "You're acting like it's your baby," Emma had teased, but her eyes were soft with understanding. Some connections transcend biology. Some families are chosen, not born. The civil lawsuit against Marcus Webb moved forward slowly, grinding through the legal system with all the speed of continental drift. But Marcus remained in jail, unable to make bail after prosecutors argued he was a flight risk with extensive resources. His company collapsed within weeks, business partners distancing themselves, contracts cancelled, employees fleeing. The man who'd seemed untouchable was systematically losing everything. Charles tried to feel satisfaction about it, but mostly just felt tired. Revenge was exhausting, even when you weren't the one pursuing it. 3 months after Grace's birth, Charles sat on Patricia's back porch watching Emma teach Doris how to change a diaper one-handed while holding a bottle. Grace was going through a phase where she refused to eat unless someone was walking around with her, and Doris's arms were exhausted. "Like this," Emma demonstrated, her movements confident despite her young age. "You prop the bottle against your shoulder, use your chin to hold it steady. Yeah, like that, and then you've got both hands for the diaper. It's all about angles." "How do you know this?" Doris asked, laughing as Grace immediately spit out the bottle to protest the position change. I used to babysit Mrs. Chen's twins for extra money. They taught me that babies are basically tiny drunk people. They're unpredictable, they leak from every orifice, and they have no concept of personal space. Emma grinned. Also, they're kind of cute when they're not screaming. Charles watched his daughter, so mature now, so confident, and felt a bittersweet ache. She'd grown up too fast, forced by circumstances to be more adult than child. But she was also extraordinary, capable, kind. Everything he'd hoped she'd become despite the challenges they'd faced. You raised a good one, Patricia said, appearing beside him with 2 beers. She handed him one and settled into the adjacent chair. Emma's special. She is, Charles agreed. Too special, sometimes. She shouldn't have had to grow up so fast. Maybe not. But she did, and look at her, she's thriving. Not despite the hardships, but maybe because of them. She learned resilience. She learned empathy. She learned that doing the right thing matters more than doing the easy thing. Patricia took a sip of her beer. Those are lessons a lot of adults never learn. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the makeshift family on the lawn. Doris had finally gotten Grace to take the bottle, and Emma was sprawled on a blanket, doing homework in the fading sunlight. I got a call from my lawyer today, Patricia said eventually. The civil case is settling. Webb's agreeing to a payout, substantial one, to avoid a prolonged trial. He's already facing 20 years minimum on the criminal charges. Fighting the civil case would just drain what's left of his assets. How much? Charles asked, then immediately felt crass for asking. Enough that Doris and Grace will be financially secure for life. Enough that you'll get compensation for what he put you through, probably around $100,000, my lawyer estimates. Patricia paused. Enough that all of us who he hurt will get something, even if it's not justice exactly. $100,000. Charles couldn't even process it. That was Emma's college fund. That was a down payment on a house. That was security he'd never imagined having. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. You earned it. Patricia looked at him seriously. But Charles, the money's great, but don't let it define this experience. What you did, the choice you made that day on the flooded road, that wasn't about money or recognition. It was about character. Don't lose sight of that. Charles nodded, understanding what she meant. It would be easy to let the lawsuit settlement become the point of the story, to tell himself he'd done a good deed and been rewarded. But that would cheapen what had actually happened. He'd helped Doris because it was right, not because it would pay off. The money was just a fortunate consequence, not the purpose. That evening, after Emma had fallen asleep on Patricia's couch and Doris had finally gotten Grace down for the night, Charles stood alone in the backyard looking at the stars. The same stars that had been there that morning in the flood, when he'd made a choice that changed everything. He thought about Frank Morrison, who'd fired him for being late. Charles had run into him at a gas station last week. Frank had looked uncomfortable, muttered something about no hard feelings and business is business. Charles had just nodded. He didn't need Frank's approval anymore. He'd found work that valued him. He'd found purpose beyond a paycheck. He thought about Jennifer, his ex-wife, who'd called out of the blue 2 weeks ago after seeing him on the news. She'd wanted to reconnect, to be part of Emma's life again. Charles had told her gently but firmly that Emma would decide if and when she wanted contact. Jennifer had been hurt, angry, accused him of poisoning their daughter against her. But Emma had overheard the conversation and had simply said, "She left us, Dad. You stayed. That's all I need to know." He thought about Marcus Webb, sitting in a jail cell, probably plotting revenge even now. Charles knew this wasn't truly over. Men like Webb didn't just disappear, even behind bars. There would be appeals, motions, perhaps eventually parole. Webb would always be a shadow on the periphery of their lives. But Charles also knew he was stronger than he'd been before. Not just him, all of them. They'd faced down something dark and emerged together, bound by shared trauma and shared triumph. "Hey, Dad." Emma's voice came from the doorway. She was wrapped in a blanket, hair mussed from sleep. "You okay out here?" Yeah, sweetheart. Just thinking. About how lucky I am. Emma padded across the grass and leaned against him, and they stood together under the stars. The settlement money, Emma started, is going to change things for us, Charles finished. But not who we are. We are still us, okay? We are still the Jones family, population 2, awesomeness level 100. Emma smiled at the reference to her old banner. Population 3, if you count Grace. And Doris. And Patricia. We are kind of a weird extended family now. The best kind, Charles agreed. Dad, I've been thinking about something. Emma's voice was hesitant. What if we used some of the money to help other people? Like, women trying to escape abusive situations. Or single parents struggling like we were. We could set up a fund or something. Make the whole Marcus Webb nightmare count for something good. Charles looked down at his 13-year-old daughter and wondered, not for the first time, how he'd gotten so lucky. I think that's a brilliant idea. Yeah. We'll talk to Patricia and Doris, see what they think. Make it a group effort. Emma hugged him tighter. I'm proud of you, Dad. For what you did. For who you are. Right back at you, kiddo. They stood there for a long moment, father and daughter, survivors and thrivers, proof that doing the right thing, even when it costs everything, was always worth it in the end. 6 months later, Charles stood in the community center at the grand opening of the Jones Webb Foundation, named ironically after both the hero and the villain of their story, a reminder that good could triumph over evil, that victims could become victors. The foundation provided emergency funds, legal assistance, and housing support for people escaping domestic violence and for single parents in crisis. Doris gave a speech, Grace babbling happily in a carrier on her chest. Emma cut the ribbon, grinning at the small crowd of supporters and local press. Patricia handed out informational pamphlets, her eyes bright with purpose. And Charles stood to the side, watching it all, thinking about a flooded road and a choice and how one moment of compassion had rippled outward in ways he never could have imagined.